Welcome to Wise Window product demo. Um, Let me first give you a briefing about what Wise Window is all about and then walk you through the product. Wise Window aggregates consumer opinions, expert opinions, and events influencing your brand, product, and competitors, and provides wisdom tools that allows visualization of this information in succinct form, um, allows you to gather insight from it, and most importantly, influences your decision making. Now, how does it do it? Essentially, Wise Window offers you relevant information from the web. So essentially, it crawls the web for reviews, discussion boards, news, and blogs, and also can integrate information from internal documents or information from internal sources such as focus groups, questionnaires, sales data, etc., dynamically. So you can track positive and negative sentiments about your brands and products against the categories, and you could also monitor and measure the topics and the buzz on discussion boards and blogs. Now, who's it meant for? Wise Window essentially empowers marketers and product designers to surface and measure relevant benchmark consumer and expert insights on the fly. Um, Now let's step through the product to give you a feel of the product and how it can be used to evaluate your product or your brand. In order to make this, in order to be essentially show the power of the tool, let's assume a certain user profile. Let's assume that the company Unilever has signed up with Wise Window to use Wise Window tools to evaluate their brand. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the brand is Dow, and maybe they're specifically interested in evaluating Dow shampoos. Um, so essentially, we're going to consider the categories shampoos, the brand is Dow, and the company is Unilever for the sake of the demo. And let's further assume that they're given a certain email address and password as the login information, which we would type in into the starting screen of the tool, and then click the go button. Now, before I click the go button, bear in mind that although the demo is very focused on beauties, in this specific case shampoos, it's domain agnostic. It works for autos, travel, consumer electronics, financial services, and healthcare, and many other domains. Um, so without further ado, let's click the button go, which takes us to the main screen of the tool. Um, Now, here, let me first give you the lay of the land before I go through a specific scenario. Um, as you can see, uh, here we have 5 different tools, each with its own independent purpose. And what we're really going to do through the demo is actually weave a specific scenario through these tools and show how these tools actually work together and why we have these 5 tools to help you draw insight. We have many more tools under development, and but this is the current set of tools which we are exposing to the public. So let me first give you a brief description of what each tool does, and then dive into the details. Um, let's first consider the tool which is called Comparative Sentiment Mapper. What this tool does is essentially it allows you to monitor opinion sites to compare products or brands with competitors or the categories to surface old web negatives, or the positives, underdeveloped negatives, and underdeveloped positives. Um, and we'll come back later to clearly understand what these actually mean. You could also type in terms here, um, which allows you to kind of dig through the consumer opinions and measure certain dimensions or certain attributes. Um, and the second tool is called Comparative Attribute Mapper. Comparative Attribute Mapper allows you to compare positive and negative sentiment of brands and products in two dimensions. It'll allow you to analyze top performers, um, bottom performers, and also select the products which are not in the top and bottom. On a four quadrant, as you can see, the four quadrants sentiment matrix, with 5 being the highest sentiment and 1 being the lowest sentiment. And so this tool essentially allows you to visualize how and see how your product and brand is positioned with respect to various attributes in the minds of consumers. The third tool is called Sentiment Trend Mapper. Um, this allows you to track brand and product sentiment over time. You can see fluctuations of your brands and products over time and your competitors within a specific time period. You can also gain confidence based on the volume of opinions and the source of opinions, where you gathered the opinions from. Um, for example, you can explore product launch impacts on your brand and your competitors and evaluate impact of crises and events on brands and product sentiments. The fourth tool is called Cross-Category Issue Mapper. It allows you to identify and explore consumer sentiments around an issue. For instance, maybe life-changing events such as maybe in women, life-changing event would be like menopause or pregnancy, or even terminal values such as freedom or creativity or accomplishment on consumer sentiments. It again allows you to discover overdeveloped and underdeveloped concepts related to an issue as it relates to a specific category. We'll dig through this tool at a later point in time. Essentially, this tool is meant to discover new demographics for a new product which you want to create for a certain demographic which you haven't probably explored before. The last tool is called Buzz Mapper. Um, Buzz Mapper allows you to pick a term, a phrase, or a sentiment and measure the buzz that exists around it for your brand and products. It'll allow you to identify the best and worst performers and rank your products and brands accordingly and to see how competitors are doing. You can measure the buzz as it relates to category, brand, or some specific industry or product. And we'll come back to the groups later. Now, there are a couple more things which I'd like to explain in the layout. As you can see on the top, there's a summarized information here which says selected opinions and selected products. Note that we started with the scenario that we are Unilever, we have the Dow, the brand, and we want to specifically evaluate shampoos. So we're going to assume that Unilever signed up for shampoo as a category on Wise Window tool. So what we're really looking at is slicing and dicing 14,736 opinions out of a universe of 918,950 opinions. So in other words, 918,950 are the number of opinions which are related to just beauty, and the 14,736 are specifically related to shampoos. We're also looking at the second number, which is the selected products, which means that we're looking at dicing through or drawing insight on 821 products out of a universe of 48,297 products. So the 48,297 products are the number of products which we are currently tracking in the beauty domain, and specifically because Unilever signed up for shampoos, you're basically looking at 821 products in the shampoo domain or the shampoo category. Okay. Couple more buttons to explain before we go through a particular scenario. First button, and these three buttons are common across each tool. They're very useful. The first button is called "What is this for?" and and what this explains to you is kind of gives you a very brief description of what the tool is. Um, some of the things which I've been talking along the way in the demo. Um, how do I use this? Basically, gives you uh, the steps of how you would use the tool, so you're never really lost in the tool. Um, and the third step, which is what we're going to use right now, is called guided discovery. And what we're going to do is it's a wizard which allows you to step through and evaluate and use a particular tool. Now, these three tools exist in pretty much every product, so you're never really lost, and the users are encouraged to use it since they're extremely useful, and they showcase some of the discovery and the powerful features of the tool. Okay, the I'll come back to these two buttons at a later point in time. So let's start with the specific scenario where let's say we are evaluating a category. As I mentioned, we signed up for, and we click the button called next, and so we signed up for shampoos. And as soon as we click shampoos, you can see all the related shampoo products kind of show up in this list, which can be used to plot additional products in the graph on the left side. Okay, now let's click the next button, which takes us to the step 3 of 3. Now, what this shows you is a list of terms and phrases which appear in the form of a tag cloud. For those of you who are not familiar what a tag cloud is, let me explain what it is. A tag cloud is something which uses the font size to indicate the statistical significance of a certain term or phrase in the context in which you're looking at. So in our case, our context happens to be shampoos, and we're looking at statistically significant words according to the consumers. In the consumer opinion texts out there on the internet, what are the significant words and phrases? And these are some of the dimensions which you could use to measure buzz on. So in our specific example, maybe let's say we choose smell as a dimension which we want to measure buzz, and maybe we're looking at smell over a 3-year period, which can be changed by the user. You can even customize the date or the time frame you're looking at. Maybe you want to measure like 9/11 time period, or it could be any other time period. And then you click the button which is called check buzz, and as soon as you kind of click the button, you're going to get back a result, which is essentially the buzz for smell in the category shampoos. And what it shows you is two colors by default. The two colors are, the blue color here indicates top 5 products with the maximum buzz, and the red color indicates the least buzz, so top 5 and bottom 5 in the category shampoos. Note that I didn't mention it as sentiment but rather as buzz, and we consider buzz as different from sentiment. So what it's really showing you is that what is most talked about, not necessarily whether what is most talked about is positive or negative. We would be using a different tool to actually see the sentiment chart. Okay. So we're looking at top 5 products. For instance, in this case, we see that there's a maximum buzz for Lush Cynthia Sylvia Stout shampoo. In the information we have gathered so far, has a maximum buzz for smell, and the least buzz is in Redken Smooth Down, with Redken being the brand. Now, this doesn't necessarily, as I mentioned before, to reiterate again, doesn't necessarily mean it's positive or negative. It just means most talked about in consumer words. And since we started the scenario with Dow, and we also said their closest competitor is Neutrogena, and since we see that they're missing, except probably for Neutrogena Triple Moisture here, and since we see Neutrogena Triple Moisture, maybe we can choose Dove as a brand and Dove Intense Moisture or something, to plot against the top 5 and bottom 5 to see how they map against this. So what you could do is that you could maybe also consider Avida as another competitor for the discussion. And notice the gray color, which essentially means that we chose Avida, the Avida All, which happens to be the brand, which includes all Avida shampoo products in this context. And the bar kind of shows up as gray color. And let's choose Dove as a brand, and Dove Intense Moisture, since we see Neutrogena Triple Moisture. And anything we select appears in gray color. Anything which comes up in default, that often modify, appears blue and red color. That's essentially the coloring convention in the tool, which is uniform across the tool. And let's again choose Neutrogena, since we consider that as our closest competitor. And let's add also maybe highlight Neutrogena Triple Moisture, although it already appears. And as you can notice, the first insight you draw is that Dove in general has more buzz with respect to smell uh, compared to Neutrogena. And from what I gather, Neutrogena by definition is supposed to be kind of smell neutral, um, as the way they position it. So the data kind of correlates with that. Now, although Dove has more buzz than Neutrogena, it doesn't necessarily mean that Dove has more positive sentiment or negative sentiment versus Neutrogena or the rest of things which you see here. So if we do really want to measure sentiment, the next tool to look at, by the way, before we move on to the next tool, one other thing to note is that, as I mentioned, we chose smell as a brand, as an attribute. You could choose something which is shiny as an attribute, and that would change the buzz term here, and you could click the button which is check buzz, and you'd see a different chart with shiny as an attribute. So you could, while being in the tool, choose different dimensions and measure different attributes. And as you can see, noticeably, we're not going to go in detail since we want to kind of go back to the smell and go back to our original story. So coming back to smell, we get back to the original graph. Now let's, having seen comparison between Dove and Neutrogena, let's step to another tool and maybe look at sentiment part and not just buzz, and see how that works out. So you can click the tool which is known as Compare Attribute Mapper, and what it, as I mentioned before, it's a two-dimensional graph. And in this case, since we chose smell as an attribute, it kind of considers both the dimensions as smell and shows the products and brands on a diagonal, which essentially means that considering the numbers, as you can see on the axis, means assuming 5 is the most positive sentiment and 1 being the least sentiment. What we're really saying is the bubble, whatever appears here, happens to have the most positive sentiment related to smell. And again, similar to buzz, we show by default the top 5 products which are in blue color, and bottom 5 products which are in red color, in the 4 quadrants. And again, this quadrant being the most desired quadrant, and the selected product would be gray. And the tool basically carries over values from one tool to other. So which means that when we move from buzz mapper compare attributes, we chose certain products, and those automatically show as gray color here. Now let's try to draw some insight in this specific tool in the context of our specific demo scenario. So we see that Neutrogena, although has less buzz than Dove, as we observed in the buzz mapper, tends to have positive sentiment much more than Dove, which essentially means that whatever buzz is there in Neutrogena tends to be extremely positive, right? We'll actually, using a different tool, actually look through the verbatim of what people are actually saying related to smell. But in this context, we're just basically seeing how they map against each other in a graphical form. You also notice that if you kind of consider Neutrogena Triple Moisture, as the values show here, has more positive buzz than maybe Dow Intense Moisture, right? And now, considering that this is a two-dimensional graph, and we're measuring here smell and moisture, you could type in a second attribute, maybe called moisture. And the reason I'm choosing moisture is because we started with Neutrogena triple moisture and Dow Intense. So a layman could potentially guess that moisture is an important attribute. So we could type in the second attribute as moisture and click again that show top or modify. Notice the change in the dimensions or the axis on the graph. Now we have one axis as moisture, another axis smell, and obviously the layout changes from diagonal to something more different. And as you can see here, again Neutrogena stands out much better than probably Dow with respect to smell or moisture. So essentially, if you consider smell and moisture as desired features, Neutrogena does fairly better than Dow. And you also notice that Neutrogena triple moisture product is less than the brand, which means that it's a below average product in the Neutrogena brand when you consider smell versus moisture. And so seems to be the case with Dow Intense Moisture versus Dowall as a brand. Pretty interesting insight. Um, Now, while we are at it, let me give you another interesting button to look at, which is extremely helpful to draw hints on the dimensions or the attributes to look at, which is called need a hint. Now, using need a hint, you could choose something else other than smell and moisture, which goes back to the tag clouds which I talked about before. In the context of shampoos, gives you different dimensions, and maybe you want to compare smell versus shiny or smell versus scalp. Maybe you want to look at pricing, where moisture is a desired feature, and you want to check which is the most expensive one or the least expensive one. So you could do many other things. I won't be going through each one of them, but just trying to explain these different features of the tool. Now considering this, how about now looking at sentiment trend over time, right? Now as you can see here, we're looking in a 3-year period, we're looking at the attribute mapper, but what this doesn't actually show is how the trend changed over time. So we have another tool, which we'll move to now, which is called a sentiment trend mapper. And what this tool gives you is the sentiment trend over time. And as you can see, it loads things fast because we already chose certain things in BuzzMapper, and those automatically got mapped, and you can add more things using the right side list. Right? Now, what we have still is the term smell, which got carried over from the other tools. So essentially, we're looking at sentiment trend over time for the chosen products. Notice that we don't have top or bottom five in this. The lines which show up here are the products or the brands which we chose to map in the other tools, and we're still measuring smell. And by the way, the terms here is optional, so you could ignore the smell factor and just in general measure how the sentiment of these 5 brands or products behave over time without considering smell. However, in this context, let's stick to the context of smell and look at how the products look like over time. Maybe since the story specifically tracks Dow Intense Moisture and Neutrogena, as you can see, it correlates very well with the compare attributes. As you can see here, that relatively over time Neutrogena triple moisture is much more positive compared to Dow Intense Moisture with respect to smell. And we can also see the correlation between the buzz mapper and the sentiment trend mapper, because as you observe these data points, the points indicate where we have data points, and this are the time periods. So the more data points you have, you can see the more dots on the line. If you notice here, Neutrogena has fewer points, like this 1 point here, 1 point with absolutely no sentiment data points here for Neutrogena, which means that Neutrogena triple moisture was not talked about much during the period from maybe 0805 to 0806, almost for close to a year. And then suddenly there's more information, yet it has less information related to smell. Um, Notice that we're not necessarily nutrient triple moisture is not talked about, but in the context of smell. Um, so that sounds pretty interesting. And which correlates with the buzz mapper. We mentioned that there is less buzz in Neutrogena compared to Dow, where, as you can see, Dow has more data points, all more uniformly. So Dow in general seems to be more influenced by smell compared to Neutrogena, at least in this context. And the bars here basically indicate the volumes, very similar to a stock chart. So what we're really trying to say is that these data points are based on these volumes, right? And what's interesting from a visualization perspective is that you can kind of zoom in into a certain time period using the bars in the zoom. And you can kind of zoom in into a certain time period or zoom out to go back to the default mapping. Now we'll move on to the next tool. Now, having seen these things, what maybe the next goal might be that if you continue to chase the issue of smell, maybe you'd like to see what really people are saying. How do you really know that something is positive, negative? What are they really trying to say in terms of verbatim? And when we need to look at verbatims and what they're really trying to say, or what is the context around smells, we would use a different tool which is called comparative sentiment mapper. And what this gives you again is something which I kind of briefly talked about but didn't actually go in details, which I'll now go into details, is basically this concept of overdeveloped and underdeveloped. What overdeveloped negative means is that what is significantly negative one versus the other. So essentially you could compare any brand or a product or a category. I'll come back to the groups later. So you could compare any category, brand or product, a brand being Dow, category being like shampoo or a conditioner, brand being Dow and Neutrogena, and product may be specific products like Dow Intense Moisture Shampoo, Neutrogena Shampoo. So you could compare product versus product, or you could compare product versus brand, or product versus category, or category versus category, and so on and so forth. And you can also slice through a certain dimension, which in this case, let's say smell, or you don't necessarily need to type the word smell, right? And what we're going to actually do is measure what is significantly negative terms and phrases which occur, maybe Dove versus shampoo to start with. And for that, let's again choose this thing called guided discoveries, and let's maybe this time say select that we want to evaluate brand, and we click the next button, and automatically gives you choices for all the brands which are in the context of shampoos. So let's say we choose the brand Dow. So we choose Dow, and as you can see, it automatically fills that. So you could either type in directly here, or you could use the wizard to fill in the details. And you click the button next, and maybe now you want to compare against shampoos. As you can see, change that. And since we signed up for shampoos, we are basically comparing Dow to shampoos. Now you start seeing the tackler which I talked about before. Now what is interesting here is basically the terms which show up here, or the phrases which show up here, are the terms or phrases which are common between Dow and shampoos, not shampoo by itself or Dow by itself. And these could be the dimensions you could measure the verbatims on. Now let's say we don't start measuring with a certain dimension, but we just click the word search bar, and when you click, it's going to process the thing and basically allow you to compare Dow the brand versus shampoo the category. It's going to show you in 4 tag clouds, and I think I explained what a tag cloud means. And just to reiterate, it basically means using font size to indicate significant terms or phrases, like as in the phrase Dow is more significant when you compare Dow and shampoo versus the word moisturizers. So essentially it's showing that Dow as a brand is being talked more about compared to shampoo opinions, which seems pretty obvious considering Dow opinions versus shampoo opinions. You're obviously going to see overweighting of the word Dow versus the rest of shampoos. And you also notice that, like for instance, the word smell is not something which seems to be significant in Dow as a brand compared to the universe of shampoos. And that's what overdeveloped and underdeveloped means. And this is the positive. The red color indicates negative, and the blue color indicates positive, which is pretty consistent across tool set. Now, if we really want to say what the consumer is actually saying, you could click on, let's say, the word hair dry, and you would see a verbatim from the internet, um, and you can see exactly what the consumer is saying in this case. If you really want to see what, you can actually click on this, and it would actually lead you to a site from where we crawled opinions from. In this case, this happens to ePinions opinion. By the way, ePinions is not the only source we gather information from. We gather from many sites, out of which ePinions happens to be one of them. And essentially, we are basically showing the opinions from where we gather from, and dice that information. Now let's get back to the tool, and that's what the verbatim basically shows, the summarized information of the opinions, and we highlight the words. And notice one of the powers of Wise Window is a tool that we highlight when that we selected hair dry, but it actually takes in consideration hair was completely dry, so it does very good English phrases. The other thing I forgot to mention, kind of going back to hair dry, was this interesting thing called not relevant and wrong sentiment. Because of its automated technology, you as a user may or may not disagree the degree of the sentiment, or how positive or negative something is, how relevant or not relevant a certain verbatim is in the context, and you could click this checkbox and help the system get better over time. So the system actually learns from user feedback, and if there's enough statistical significance, then it'll actually change the results. So essentially what we're showing here is what is statistically significant phrases and words, not based on a single phrase or a single opinion. And this comes back to the confidence level, which is shown here, which is the confidence high and medium. And this basically says statistically significance of how confident are we the results related to what we show here. And this can be configurable using something known as threshold, which we would come when we visit the tab which is called preferences, which will come back later. Um, the second thing which I actually want to show while we are at this is this checkbox which is called auto refine. Um, what the difference between checking box, auto refine, not auto refine, is this emphasis on attributes and entities. What I mean by that is when auto refine is not checked, it tends to emphasize um, entities, or like for instance brand names or the categories and things like that, like Dow showing up here, or Neutrogena and things like that. But however, if you click auto refine, it essentially filters out search phrases such as Dow, and tries to emphasize the attributes of a product, such as weighing it naturally, and changes the weight of those terms and phrases. And you could similarly click on weightless and look at verbatim on the internet, very similar to what we did before. Okay, and again we're comparing Dove versus shampoos and finding out significantly negative and significantly positive words and phrases. And let's now move on to a different tool which is called cross category issue mapper. Now this tool, as I mentioned before, is used mostly, let's say if you're trying to create a brand new product for different demographics. Maybe you want to create a shampoo, and you want to find out what are the issues faced in general by pregnant women or menopause women in menopause, and maybe create a new shampoo which is targeted towards that audience. As you can see, this could apply in many cases in many different contexts. But for the demo's sake, we're going to focus on some health topics. As you can see, we have many different health topics, but let's take specifically the case of pregnancy. Let's say health issues, pregnancy, and we choose shampoos. So essentially, through the eyes of somebody who manufactures shampoos, makes shampoo products, we would like to look at pregnancy and discover significant terms or phrases in pregnancy discussion which relate to maybe hair or scalp or something which is in the context of shampoos, and try to discover the issues and maybe create new products which cater to that specific audience and increase your market size. And when we click the button, we're going to get these different terms of which is in the context of shampoo, which means that we're trying to find what is significant terms which are in the universe of shampoos which happen to be significant even in the pregnancy context. So as you can see, right off the back, you start seeing something like hair soft. So it's what it's really saying is something in pregnancy. They're talking about a conditioner or some kind of beauty product which makes the hair thicker and shiny soft, and somehow that has impact during pregnancy. You could click a different term, let's say dry hair, and you see pregnant women complaining about dry hair, untangling dry hair, and you could again click on the verbatim. It would actually take you to the discussion forum where we actually took the message discussion. And let me explain you how this is useful. Maybe you discover dry hair and you go back to your labs and create a brand new product which is shampoo which is targeted towards pregnancy women who have dry hair. Maybe come back to the pointer to this specific site, maybe log in into this pregnancy forum site, intervene in a certain conversation, say, hey, we created a new shampoo product which is targeted towards women which might have dry hair problem, create a brand new product which is very context sensitive. Now let's get back to the product. So having given this overview of this product, we basically covered the basic product layout, how the product works, and hopefully it's very useful in your scenario too. Now let's go into slightly more advanced features, which is now preferences. And what preferences allows you is to essentially customize all your tools to your liking and gives you infinite number of combinations. And this will also explain what we kind of ignored before, which is called groups. So without further ado, let's click on the button which is called pregnancy. And what this gives you is essentially, notice the many categories we have here. So in beauties, we have many categories, as you can see. Deodorants, department stores, for instance, you can actually see how Walmart or Target or Sephora or Macy's or Nordstrom influence your products, and what is the consumer sentiment about them, or the buzz in certain stores, including pharmaceutical chains. And it could be interesting triangulation where you could measure how you measure beauty products and see the stores which tend to carry these kinds of products, and see what is the sentiment of stores, and maybe change your marketing strategy to position differently in different markets, in supermarket chains versus discount club chains such as Costco and things like that. And so you can add more categories on the fly. Notice that the shampoo is selected, but you could check box and save and add more categories, and they would automatically get added to the tool, and you can analyze those categories like conditioners and other hair care products, supermarket chains and things. The second tab is called included site, which basically gives you a summary of the different sites we have crawled so far related beauty. We also give the count, and we're going to pretty soon start showing the ranking of these sites. So you get an idea of maybe you want to combine sites with top 5 ranking according to consumers, or the internet ranking such as Google ranking and Alexa ranking. It also tells you when was the data last updated. You can see more sites here. or say less sites, and the user can suggest more sites. Maybe you're aware of more sites than we crawled, and notice that this sites is an ongoing thing that we constantly crawl, but however we could miss some sites which you could add or suggest here based on your domain knowledge. And some of those results would start appearing in a couple of days. You would start crawling and we would gather results, and it would start influencing your results. Now we have this other concept called clipping groups of sites, which is a phenomenal feature where you could select maybe a couple of sites. Maybe you select, let's say, Makeup Alley and maybe Folica, and say maybe call it like a Gen X site. So you can call it Gen X. And when you go back to the tool, you start seeing that. And what you can do is that you can filter all the tool results based on the Gen X, which essentially means that you could compare the source of information, where you could probably compare Gen X versus Gen Y, and things like that, based on your definition of things. Now we also have another feature, this tab, which is called Manage Groups, and this gives you infinite number of combinations of ways of using the tool. You could combine existing categories, or you could combine and create new group using certain products. What this means is that, let's say, maybe instead of taking granularity where you're comparing Dove as a brand versus shampoos, maybe you do want to compare all dandruff shampoos versus rest of the shampoos, or dandruff shampoos versus brand, and things like that. So you could check box and select a set of products, and you could choose any number of them and name your product as group, as an aggregate, as something, and use that group as a way of measuring or comparing something. And as you can see, this gives you infinite number of combinations of being able to group products and categories, and being able to use that to influence a sentiment. This could also be used where maybe from marketing perspective, you might have positioned five different flavors of a product, but in reality, maybe they're all same, so you could combine that. This is pretty common in beauty or in the cars, where you might have a four-door car and a two-door car, and so on and so forth. Right? The next interesting feature is called Trust Gauge, which essentially allows you to tweak the confidence threshold. Now, the number by default is 15, which you could change, and whatever you change here influences all the tools. The way it changes is that what we essentially saying is that we are constraining any product for inclusion in the tools, and the products which we can measure are the products which have at least 50 opinions out there. If you were to change that number to 10, what that means is that you're okay with including products which have, even if they have less than 50 opinions, such as 10 opinions. Now, considering the standard focus group size, which go from 15 to 25, maybe even 15 to 25 may be acceptable, and you could change the threshold. And that's the power of the tool, where it's highly customizable to your liking. As explained here, we're going to be introducing more ranking from social network like MySpace and Facebook and Google and Alexa and many of the sources, and help you group things or use that as a way of judge your trustworthiness of the tool. We place a strong emphasis on trustworthiness and unfiltered information, unadulterated information, so you can make the best decisions. And that's one of the driving philosophies of Wise Window tools, as opposed to giving predefined reports, is that we provide it as a tool, so you can kind of wake up in the middle of the night to check some hypothesis which you might have, and discover new things, analyze competitive situation, or maybe even substantiate your advertising claims of certain shampooing certain ways, and looking if consumers really believe that. And as again I emphasize, I'd like to reiterate that although the demo is focused on shampoos and beauty, a product actually works across many different domains, be it beauty, autos, travel, financial services. Um, so please do contact us for many different sectors, and we'd happily work with you. And hopefully, this helps in your decision making, and you'd be interested in signing up. And hopefully, you enjoyed the demo, and I hope it is useful. If you have any other questions, please do contact info@wisewindow.com. And with that, I'm going to sign off. And thank you very much for your time and patience. Bye bye.